is a lot of fun to talk to each other, I know. We are honored to welcome incredible experts. We're so lucky to have them today. Digital Evolution Institute is really so grateful for you getting here and sharing your wisdom with us. I would like to present the panel on cybersecurity, data privacy, and AI for boards, risks and oversight. Missy, Orrie, Dominique, Bob, Christina, we're so, so happy to welcome you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. We're very pleased to welcome all of you to what will certainly be a very robust conversation, given the expertise of this esteemed panel. You may notice a different face on the stage here. I am sorry to announce that Edna Conway was one of those people that could not get here thanks to Mother Nature and Delta Airlines. But she sends her deepest regrets, but the confidence that she has left us in very fine hands with Orrie Dinstein from Marsh McLennan, Dominique Shelton Leipzig from Global Data Innovation, Bob West, who I just met about 2 seconds ago. He is the virtual Edna, is what I understand.
I am not a hologram.
And Christina Dolan with RSA Security. To kick off, would each of you share your thoughts on what are the common risks around AI, data privacy, and cybersecurity, and what are the risks that are unique? Why don't we start with Orrie and go down the line?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm going to start with the usual disclaimer that I don't speak for my company or our board, and my opinions are my own. In fact, I keep changing them so they're not even my own opinions. But having said that, so privacy, cyber, AI, what do they share in common? They are strategic, global, data-driven types of issues that affect all companies, regardless of what you're doing. You have data, and if you have data, then you're a target, and you have personal data, including of your employees, and AI is affecting everyone. Everyone should be playing with AI and worried about AI at the same time. So that's what I see as a commonality. The differences, I think, are much starker. I'll start with cyber. Cyber is the old issue. As many people have said in the cyberspace, and don't quote me as saying it, I'm just repeating, there's only two kinds of companies, right? Those who have been hacked and those who haven't yet figured out that they've been hacked, right? So everyone knows that cyber is a threat. And again, small company, mid-size, large, banking, insurance, manufacturing, everyone is a target, and boards have to worry about cyber and be worried that their companies are doing enough to defend themselves. Privacy is a little bit different. I think that data-driven companies get privacy, but a lot of companies that are not data-driven, PI, personal data-driven companies, they don't get it as much. And I say this a little bit from personal experience of being part of a large conglomerate called GE, and as well as talking to peers and others. And I think that, again, there's not as much board awareness of the challenges that personal data poses, and probably not as much expertise. On the cyber front, there's a requirement to have expertise for certain companies, NYDFS, SEC. So many companies, public companies, have more cyber experience and expertise than they do privacy. AI is the new child that I think many people haven't figured out yet what it is, what it means, how to manage it. And I think, so thinking from a board perspective, on the cyber front, the most important thing to ask is, are we doing enough? Well, are we focused on this, and are we doing enough? And you can never do enough, but you have to do enough to pass some, we'll call it basic threshold. Privacy, as I said, is much more unique depending on the profile of your company, the data you process, and everything else. And with AI, I think the most important question is, who's in charge? Right? Is it tech? Is it legal? Is it compliance? Is it risk? Is it the business? And who's in the room babysitting the people who are playing with AI and running and breaking things in the process? So that's kind of my whirlwind of an answer to a very, very big question.
And Dominique, how would you add to that from your perspective?
Thank you. And I think everything Orrie said is so true. The biggest risk that I see for cyber privacy and AI, and this is after 33 years in big law before I started my company, in de-risking companies at the most vulnerable times, is the lack of clear and actionable frameworks for governance. And Orrie talked about this, but the miss and that failure, say for cyber, for example, the failure to clearly and put out the frameworks, organizational behavioral change management frameworks, has cost our global economy in the past 10 years 60 trillion with a T dollars, okay? Over double our gross domestic product in the US. So that is why the urgency about getting a handle on this is so critical. What could have transformed the past 10 years and kept that 60 trillion with our companies and our economy versus going out the door to incident response is, on the cyber side, very straightforward. There's like 6 things, but most important is know where your critical assets are. I think Chris has already talked to you about this, but there's not a reason in the world that any company should not have an active, real-time data inventory so they know where their critical assets are ahead of time, and they go lock those down. Every time you see a headline, that just means that that did not occur. On AI, okay, we developed at Global Data Innovation a patent-pending trust framework for governance that works. And that's what is necessary here. How many people have heard AI's moving too fast, or let me see what happens with illegal, or I don't want to disrupt innovation? That type of thinking is what got us with cyber 25 years ago into the $60 trillion pit we're in now. There are tools, that's the good news, to exercise governance with AI, and we'll get into those in greater detail, but do resist the urge to put your head in the sand and wait. AI is being built right now, and in the next 15, 18 months, it will be too late to have really effective impact as investors and also as board members. Okay.
Okay. Bob, what would you like to add to this?
Let me add a couple things. So just as background, I've worked in cybersecurity for a little over 30 years. I've held Chief Information Security Officer role with a couple large banks. I've done consulting and have worked on the product side. Right now, we're helping 2 early-stage generative AI cybersecurity companies go to market. So that's the good news. There's some ways to solve the problem. But fundamentally, the way that I look at generative AI more specifically, because AI has been around for decades. But less than 2.5 years ago, there was a handful of people that knew what ChatGPT was, and it was unleashed on the world, and there's been this ready, fire, aim exercise where I think I need to be using generative AI as a corporation, but what am I using it for? Who is using it? What type of information is being put into, pick your favorite version of generative AI engines, whether it's ChatGPT or Microsoft's Copilot. Please avoid using DeepSeek because a lot of information goes back directly to China. But understanding who is using it and putting some controls around it is fundamental. And by the way, I would love to talk to you about AI governance afterwards. You know, I would also say, and it was echoed earlier, that doing the basics to protect information is fundamental. That's how most companies get into trouble, is not doing the basic care and feeding of protecting information. And the same thing holds true in terms of generative AI. It's very fast moving, but the good news is that there are companies, and happy to talk to you afterwards about the ones that we're helping out.
Thanks, Bob. And Chris,
Well,
now you.
last but not least, am I the only engineer on this panel now? Are you? You're not one? Okay. So I have a completely different viewpoint now. No, I was only kidding. I actually serve I've been serving on public boards. I'm chair of the audit committee. And obviously with my background in cyber, I also, sort of lead that initiative as well from a risk perspective. I was CEO of an MIT spinoff in the AI space, and I've been sort of part of every sort of new technology wave that's come about. So and I actually have a company I co-founded with retired CEO of Medtronic in Europe that's doing AI. So I believe that if you don't innovate, you're out of business. And if you are out of business, it doesn't matter if you get hacked because you have no customers, right? So you have to balance that a little bit and then really think about what is the board position, what is their role about in terms of managing the risk, but then making sure that the people running the company have the ability to be successful at building that. Now, when you look at some of the statistics that have come from some of the AI hosting companies, I'm not going to name one, they say that only 10% of this massively growing number of AI projects actually gets to completion, right? And I'm sure you've read some of the headlines about companies that are not even sure of what's getting scooped up and into these environments out of these locked up databases where everything was well controlled in terms of who had access to it, and they get swooped up into these environments. And to Bob's point, do they get scooped up and sent to China, or what happens? So I do think that there are a lot of people who take that initiative and run with it. And as we talked on our call, cyber is really the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, the availability of that information. And so when you're using AI, you're at the heart of what cybersecurity is, right? So it's a balancing act. Since the panel is about board risk, one of the questions I have to ask is where is that line in terms of what is the board's responsibility to manage the risk, but yet give the organization the space to actually do their job, right? I mean, CISOs in general will have frameworks, and I know there's one in the audience who shared that with my class at Columbia when I was teaching, in terms of how they control the access to that data with their framework to make sure that there's a certain amount of innovation, but yet the understanding of what data is being used and how it's being used and the environment that it's being used in. And so I do think there are a lot of risks, but I do ask the question, why is it that only 10% of this growing base of AI projects across all of these large AI hosting companies, why is it only 10% actually get to completion? And I think that there's a component of governance that should be about the ability to execute and knowing what they're doing.
Well, there's certainly always that balance of risk and reward when it comes to digital transformation, and particularly with the wide adoption of AI, and as we move into real generative AI, genetic AI. And you hit a good point, Christina, in terms of the balance that's needed at the board level. You don't want oversight to inhibit innovation because it's critical. But what methodologies can be used by a board to better assess and quantify what the risk is for that responsible oversight? I was going to start with Christina because she went last time, but I'm thinking let's jump into Dominique second to last.
So what we counsel CEOs and board members is on a trust framework. This is to what you're seeing and what Christina touched on, this paralysis. There's so much detail that leads to paralysis. Paralysis leads to blindness. Blindness leads to risk. So what we do is try to put forward a clear framework. And it's just based on the word trust. T for triage. That means treating high-risk AI different than low risk. So you're not holding up projects that are low risk and putting your company strategically behind the 8 ball, but you are making sure that the organization is paying attention to the high risk and also checking legal frameworks for that. And along with triage is ROI. right? Like, why are we doing this project? I think you were just mentioning that, Chris. You know, why are we doing this project, and what will it do in terms of revenue, operations, and strategy for the organization? That is T for triage. R in trust. That means, do we have the right data? And you can ask this as a board member without getting in the way of innovation. Do we have the right data here training our application? I'm not talking about the whole wide internet and what the frontier models are putting together, whether or not they're able to pluck out all of the errors in the internet. That's highly unlikely by the time you guys are getting going. I'm talking about the applications in the companies you're sitting on the boards of, you're investing in. They are building applications on top of the large language models. And the question there is, do we have the right data to train our model that we control, that we are putting in? Is it accurate? And do we have rights, IP rights, privacy rights, creating the logging system so that you can defend the work? And this can happen quickly. This is so important in trust. Auditing of your AI output for quality control. Every single person in here sits on a board or is a CEO or invests in companies that have standards. AI is just replacing something that somebody else was doing as a human. You wouldn't dream of having your humans come in untrained and just let them loose, not on your standards. We should not do that with AI. What that means is, whatever your standard is for accuracy, whatever IP you're trying to protect, et cetera, AI needs to know that too in terms of code. And you embed that, and it works while you're sleeping. So your team's not having to hover over the AI itself. The standard is there, and when, to your point, not if you're breached, but when models drift, every single generative AI model in the world today drifts, and it is not preventable on a training level, RAG time, or otherwise refining. It degrades over time. So if you do not want your brand to go drifting with it, your standards need to be there so that you are the supervising, the last S in trust, the supervising SWAT team is alerted when inaccuracy is occurring according to your standards, et cetera. And that SWAT team of supervisors can jump in with the last T, the technical documentation that they do need to repair the model, okay? Logging data, metadata of the baseline of the tests that were done in you. It's straightforward. It is derived from 100 regulatory frameworks in 100 countries, just what I told you. It is derived from a bunch of data scientists and other things, but from a board perspective, you don't need to read 1,000 pages. These 5 things are the questions you can ask to get the innovation going at speed and scale accurately, not having situations like what happened to the logistics company in London, where the CEO wakes up to the name of their company trending on X, formerly Twitter, because their chatbot, consumer-facing, started cursing out the customers. Or having a situation where the state of Tennessee spent $400 million on their algorithm with a wonderful, trustworthy team internally, as well as a major consulting firm, only to have a judge rule in August that the AI was denying claims for Medicare and Medicaid in error 92% of the time. Or the retail pharmacy, okay, that's banned from using AI for the next 5 years and had to seek bankruptcy protection because their vendor's AI was misidentifying paying customers as criminals, okay? We're sitting on 1,000 stories like this, which are entirely preventable, just as many of these cyber things are, with the organizational change management that you guys here can be the catalyst in your companies to just get these frameworks in place and avoid this stuff. It's not hard, it's not technically different, but you must be the leaders here.
Thank you, Dominique. That was very positive in terms of all the negative that you shared on these cases that are terrifying. Bob, I can tell that you have some information you'd like to share.
Yeah, definitely. So, I view generative AI tool systems as being tools, right? And as members of boards, you have the fiduciary responsibility to understand the risks. So as a board member, I would be asking, who is using generative AI? What are they using it for? What types of controls are in place to make sure that, to Dominique's point, bad things don't happen. I tend to use quality as an analogy a fair amount. So think of when a car rolls off the assembly line, you don't say, let's add quality now, right? It's a function of the manufacturing process. And if you don't have the right level of quality, you have defects which lead to recalls, and those are very expensive. But the big damage is to brand and reputation. And in a similar context, making sure that as AI applications are being implemented or that AI tools in a very broad context are being used, you have to understand what controls are in place. Have we done testing? Are there any holes that are just really blatant that we need to take care of? As Dominique was saying, AI engines make mistakes. And so you need to take that into account. I see it as being a very strong tool, but you need to understand it well before you adopt it at scale.
And just to jump in on what you said, just in last week's New York Times, OpenAI's research was released about some of the answers being incorrect 43% of the time. When it's your brand, you can control for that. You can't be behind in not using the technology, but you gotta watch it. You've got to have control so that, as you mentioned, that you're not a headline. So this is very straightforward. We're saying something to be able to move quickly and at scale. The reason things are held back, because a lot of boards are nervous about unintended consequences. We can do away with that with a structure.
Yeah, and people, people are writing generative AI engines, and people aren't perfect, right? They make mistakes, and so you need to understand what types of things could happen or can happen given the generative AI tools that you're using.
So I just wanted to add to that, but in this roundtable where we were discussing some of the things that are holding back this 90%, one of the items is not understanding the data. We're not even talking about from a regulatory perspective, but in other words, what is the data I need to actually do what I'm trying to get done? And if it's not in the right format, how do I convert it? And what are the issues in terms of where I'm going to convert it? So we're not even talking about, things at the regulatory level. It's really, the risk is financial. They're spending money on a team. They have a goal. They have a business goal. And they haven't quite figured out, because it's such a new technology and people don't understand it. But anyway, this is just the engineer over here talking, so.
What are some of the methodologies from that engineering perspective that you feel can be used at the board level?
So having been a head of technology and head of product and, built companies and products, and also sitting on boards and being head of an audit committee, I kind of have a foot in both camps. I think it's really important to have smart people with a plan, give them the runway to do the work. And how many people here have American Express cards? How often do you get alerts? I'm still waiting for my new cards to come because my children just seem to do the weirdest things with my cards. So I love that. That's AI from 1990. Like, hello. Not all AI needs like a warning sign. I love that AI. And I think that a lot of the ROI that's going to come from AI isn't going to come from like, OpenAI and using these ongoing generative models to do all these really expansive things. I think that there's a lot of small things that are going to create value that are difficult to do without the AI, right? So I think you have to sort of draw a line from the framework perspective. It's like, okay, are you doing open-ended, generative, oh my gosh, we have no idea where this is going to go type of stuff? Or are you talking about a very specific data set that you've curated and you've trained that AI on it, like we're doing at my company? The thought that we would use OpenAI that's been trained on these weird Reddit comments, if you look at how much they've paid Reddit for their training model, those are two different animals, right? We're not talking about drift. You're talking about very specific, small, you're talking about advanced technology. So if you understand what the rules are and you put your innovative engineering hat on and you give people the leeway to work within that, within that model, you give people the runway to actually solve interesting problems that create the ROI. Now, I keep talking about Harry, who's over there from Sony. When he came and spoke to my class, he explained to the students about the importance of frameworks, right? He wants to, he said, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this whole idea of allowing for innovation but having guardrails because you have to protect the data are like two different things. So if you're doing a project that isn't customer facing, it's not generative AI, right? Does the board have to be involved? I mean, so I think there has to be sort of a level of understanding of where the risk actually lies and let people innovate and solve interesting problems, because there's a lot of AI taking place. For example, Industrial Parts is a company up in Connecticut that had football fields worth of information, and a couple of people who've been at the firm for 40 years who had a lot of this in their heads. So taking that made people who just joined the firm be able to answer very sophisticated questions. So I think you have to put it in context. Not everything is dangerous, and I think that there's going to be a lot of ROI with these Industry 5.0 technologies, and you just have to have enough of an understanding of where the danger zone is. If you're interfacing with a customer, it has to do with your brand. I think that that's one category, but if you have a trained data set and it's just another application, then I think you just have these parameters that say, what is the data am I using? It's the questions you ask at a board meeting, like, what is the data? What is, where is it? What's the liability? How long do we store it for? What are the rules associated with that? And, and how are we using the data? So anyway, but that's
So one second, Dominique, because I can tell that Orrie's been very patient, and as the lead at Marsh McLennan's privacy practice, I'm curious to hear some of your feedback to the others, but some of what you might share with the group.
Yeah, no, thank you. I actually enjoy listening to them, so it was great. I want to start with a couple of high-level comments. Number one, there's different kinds of boards, right? There's public companies and private equity and everything. And I think we've established that actually most people in this room are not associated with private companies. So the obligations will differ based on the size of the company and whether you're publicly traded or not. So that's one thing I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, that all boards, regardless of company size, have the same role to play. The second thing I want to say is, just listening to my colleagues, I'm often struck by how people who do this for a living forget how much people who don't do this for a living don't understand the language. I recently sat at a meeting where somebody was talking LLMs and RAG and this and fine-tuning, and afterwards I turned to my right and said to the person next to me, how much of that did you get? And they were like, nothing. And so we sometimes forget that, our CISO will walk into a board and give a cyber presentation, and I always wonder, how much did they get? Like, probably half this board have their admins print out their emails for them, right? So how much do they really understand about the unique nitty-gritty details of cyber? So training is critical, right? Regardless of whether you're in a big company, a small company, a massive company, you probably don't know enough to be effective across privacy, cyber, and AI. And so training and education is really important. I don't know a lot of board members who like to interrupt the board meeting and say, tell me again what that means, because I'm the only one in the room who seems to not know what that is. They're not, but nobody wants to be the first to raise their hand and admit that they don't know. So better to learn in advance. And then my panelists talked exhaustively about Gen AI, so I do want to turn to privacy and cybersecurity. And again, privacy is a critical piece because so many companies have so much data, personal data, and data that's subject to rules. And again, there seems to be a lack of awareness and understanding about the restrictions that apply. For instance, I don't know how many people in the room know about the DOJ bulk transfer rules that were recently enacted that basically prevent companies from sending bulk data to countries of interest, let's call it China. And China includes Hong Kong and Macau, by the way. China, by the way, has equally become a bit of a closed hub with increased localization and restrictions on data not flowing out of China. It's extremely difficult for companies operating in China to flow data out of China. There's other countries out there. Some of this is not by privacy law, it's by regulation. In India, for example, in Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Australia, Canada, there's many places where pockets of data can't move. And that's a problem because companies now, everything is cloud, everything is big data lakes, everything is throw it all in the bucket and let's analyze it to death and make shitloads of money, right? But it doesn't always work that way when you've got all these laws that make it difficult. And then, again, cyber is the bread and butter, but again, if you don't have cybersecurity, that includes AI products, right? If you're running out to market with AI products that can easily be jailbroken or otherwise be attacked, there's lots of attacks on AI products, lots. You can, poisoning attacks and other things, and again, I don't want to just throw jargon at you, but the point is, bad people are attacking AI products and forcing them to do things that they were told not to do or trained not to do, and that means that you can do a whole lot of work on AI and throw it out to the world and think that you're being really effective and dreaming of all that ROI. And meanwhile, those tools can be used against you in a nefarious way. So it all ties back together. Again, it comes back to data, as I said at the beginning, right? And since AI is everyone's focus, AI is driven by data. Data means privacy, and data means cybersecurity. And if you don't understand all three legs of that stool, then you can't be an effective arbiter of what your company is doing.
Thank you. A lot of information. I'm going to be really bad and take 2 seconds for speed dial really fast in one sentence, one short sentence. If you were talking to a non-technical person, non-legal person as well, what would you say to compel a board member to be more engaged in the conversation around cybersecurity?
Part of your fiduciary responsibility to understand the risks and ask the right questions as well to make sure that you understand the state of affairs.
Okay.
So you're saying somebody who's not that technical or legal. I basically would say figure out how these tools work, because it's a dual-edged sword. If you don't know how to make money with them, you will not be around. And if you don't understand how to use the data, you will have some liabilities associated with your future. So, go out and learn it.
Run-on sentence, but I get it. Dominique.
I wasn't an English major.
I agree with everything that's been said and what Orrie said in terms of training. We just had, as an extension of this, Chris Hetner, who you heard from earlier, was at the National Press Club for a Global Data Innovation Digital Trust Summit that we held on April 23rd. We're doing it again next March. We meet quarterly, and we actually take board members and CEOs through practicum, so you can start practicing these frameworks. Just as Orrie said, privacy cost our global economy $1.5 trillion.
Okay, this is more than one sentence.
Okay.
I already broke the rules. I've got to give Orrie a chance, just one sentence.
Yeah, I would just say that a bad cyber event is going to make your life really miserable.
Ooh, well, it was great that Justin was here before this, after that statement, for the sunshine and the warmth of his life story. But we hope that you were able to take a lot of very, very actionable information from this panel. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.